Welcome to The New Next, a podcast that addresses current events and how they will impact the future. Co-hosted by the inquisitive public speaking champion, Mike McVeigh, and energy, economics, and technology expert, Matt Jensen. Join us as we explore all things energy, economic, tech, and political, and how they will affect our future.
Podcasts typically grow by word of mouth. If you know anyone who would enjoy this content, sharing this in a message or by posting on social media would mean the world to us. Thanks for listening, and let's get started.
We mentioned a few weeks ago, or it feels like a few weeks ago, about how President Biden wrote letters to each of the CEOs and stuff of the oil and gas companies about trying to curb some of the pricing and stuff. The American Petroleum Institute released a statement, and I actually kind of want to read this out loud, if that's okay.
Yeah, totally.
And they sent this on June 15th. Mike Summers, the API president and CEO, in response to the letter that President Biden sent to them. While we appreciate the opportunity to open increased dialogue with the White House, the administration's misguided policy agenda shifting away from domestic oil and natural gas has compounded inflationary pressures and added headwinds to the company's daily efforts to meet growing energy needs while reducing emissions. So right there, some stuff you've already mentioned. And then continues, I reinforced in a letter to President Biden and his cabinet yesterday 10 meaningful policy actions to ultimately alleviate pain at the pump and strengthen national security, including approving critical energy infrastructure, increasing access to capital, holding energy lease sales, and among other urgent priorities. And then basically goes on to say, like, we urge the president to prioritize unlocking U.S. energy resources.
Better than begging Saudi Arabia.
So, and you can go on to API's website, api.org, and you can read these 10 in 2022, the 10 policies to unleash American energy and fuel recovery. Now, I will say some of these, maybe if you explain them all, I would be like, oh, okay, I'm okay with that. Some of them, I won't lie, when I first read it and even read the little description that they give, I'm definitely against it. Just my initial thoughts and stuff. But I'm going to go over a few of them, and then if you want to talk about a couple of them, we can. But I hate pegging one side or the other as always being the problem. And it does look like API, so the oil and gas industry as a whole, have made some legitimate offerings to try to work with the current administration to get things in better control.
And this is a lobbying group too. So, there's this is a lobby that the oil and gas industry funds. So having that context to their whole plan is to advocate for, oil and gas financial interests.
So again, even if you're like me and you don't agree with all of these, they are offering lots of options, because 10 options is a lot more than what we normally ask for. When we ask for solutions to problems, most of us are good with one, maybe two. And if you're really experimental, maybe 3 or 4, but 10 is a good chunk, especially with some of the ones that they mentioned. So some of the things they mention are to lift developmental restrictions on federal lands and waters. I will say that that's one of the ones that just automatically kind of, when I'm thinking of federal lands, is I'm thinking a lot of Native Indians or American Indians and some of the parks and stuff. And maybe that's not what they're talking about, but that's what goes in my mind. Would that be inaccurate? Is that what they're talking about with federal lands, or are they talking about something else?
So the majority of New Mexico production is on federal lands. So the Permian, so this is basically saying that they should go back to what they had before they came in, essentially.
Before the Biden administration came in? Okay.
So it mentions the 5-year problem for the outer continental shelf and hold mandated quarterly onshore lease sales There's it's law that the Department of Interior has to issue a 5-year program for the Outer Continental Shelf. So that's a requirement of that institution, and they may have done it recently. I can't be sure on that, but I think the last one was 2017 that they did it, and it's
well, that
due.
Makes sense if
it's due this year to be released. Hold mandated quarterly onshore lease sales with equitable terms. Basically, they stopped leasing, which was illegal at the time. A court found that the Department of the Interior illegally stopped these lease sales and forced them to do it, and they just decided to ignore that court order.
Gotcha.
So they're illegally doing that based on court rulings right now.
Another thing they said is to designate critical energy infrastructure projects, and reading the small description, that sounds really smart to me. Fix the NEPA.
Well,
that's the national.
Can I touch on that real quick?
Absolutely.
Critical energy.
It's your podcast too.
Infrastructure podcast or projects. I would say a lot of this is around pipelines. So, pipelines, you basically have to build across a vast part of lands, essentially. If it goes anywhere where it exports, or if it goes anywhere across state lines, then that's federal government jurisdiction. There's been a lot of stuff that's been put in place to basically make it that. So first off, you have the canceled pipelines. Then you also have pipelines that were approved, and then they basically said, well, you didn't do this stuff. That's a new regulation, so it's not approved anymore. There's pipelines in Michigan. There's the which was a replacement of old pipeline that needs to be replaced for safety. And there's pipelines in Iowa, Keystone, and there's like the Marcellus. Marcellus is the key natural gas driver in the Northeast, and they're having issues getting pipelines too. So years ago, when we were like 2014, 2015, we were in this situation too, where gas was like selling basically for negative money up there because there was too much gas. And there were people that were buying gas from other operators that had hedges. So essentially contracts booked on the pipelines there. They were stopped producing their own gas. They were just buying gas to meet their commitments and making a spread on it. So if you really think about what's critical energy infrastructure, is natural gas is stranded in a lot of these basins where there's just not enough pipeline to increase production, because what are you going to do with it? You're either going to put it on rail, which is illegal to do for natural gas. You can't rail natural gas in the United States, but for oil, there's pipelines are a lot safer than rail for oil. And so there's, I mean, you should do your own research, go down a rabbit hole on that too. But if you read about FERC, they govern pipelines in the United States. But there's a lot of pipelines here in Oklahoma. It's something that we're used to. I think a lot of these other places, people aren't really knowledgeable about the industry and what goes to kind of like make sure that these don't explode, basically. But it's kind of like, it's hard for the industry to expand unless you have the ability to take that product and transport it somewhere else.
So because I wasn't reading pipelines at all from the description it was given. So now when you say that, maybe I'm going back on this one too, or maybe not. I don't know. I really don't know enough about it. So I guess I'll need to go down my own rabbit hole. But it seems to bring back memory of a few years ago. I want to say like 2017 or 2018. There's a huge thing about the pipelines that were going on in either New Mexico or Arizona. That because it was going under on like tribal lands and stuff.
Oh, the Dakota Access.
Is that what that was?
Yeah. So one other thing that they did was they basically removed the eminent domain sort of thing, which everybody else in the United States does now, and then they gave that eminent domain back to tribal lands. So essentially, these are sovereign nations that can say no to any pipeline now. I think that makes it pretty difficult in certain instances to transport oil and gas. The funny thing about Dakota Access is certain people that control the railroads up there and knew that they would lose oil going on the rail and would also have to lower the prices for transport. Mm-hmm. They were funding a lot of the environmental groups up there against the pipeline. So there's always, kind of like we talked about finance earlier, it's always good to see where the money's going and to see what the motives are involved in some of that. So it's just, yeah. So I feel your point. Like if in Oklahoma, like the Osage, the story there with a lot of Osage Indians getting killed and getting their mineral rights stolen. There's a lot of bad history, but things are different now. And New Mexico, northern New Mexico, there's when they adjusted some of the basically the federal drilling requirements around certain areas up there. There's, I can't remember the Native or American Indian tribe that has it, but they had a huge energy services business where they were making a lot of money up there. And overnight they were basically had their business get shut down. So it's, I think, with American Indians, right? Like we see what we see on TV and we think that there's a uniform policy for all of them, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. It's not always a good thing. So I
think I would like to go through the rest of the 10, but I don't want to do it tonight.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot, and I would just say go and check it out. But just even hearing you're describing about some of these, it's a lot of layers, a lot of complications that they're not just simple binary, like either this or that.
It would be nice to actually have a discussion, like a broad discussion about these different items. Mm-hmm. Because I feel like these are really discussed very surface level, and it's what do we want as a country? Do we want really expensive oil and to get rid of this? We're in a way that detriments our economy and the Western economies, or do we want to make a little concessions here for kind of like the greater good in this aspect?
Right.
And I don't really feel that that's it. It really, like, there's positives and negatives to all these things. It's a 10-point plan, but depending on your position on a certain situation or a certain element, like, you maybe I like that or I don't, but it's really not a black or white sort of thing. A lot of these are really kind of like nuanced discussions.
Yeah, I definitely think we should come back to those. Was there anything specific you wanted to mention about oil and gas right now?
Yeah, let's see. I'm trying to think. One thing that I think would be interesting was there was a oilprice.com article that I read, and it was discussing how oil and gas exports are fueling higher prices domestically.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's something to that too, because you're kind of go back to that infrastructure discussion. There's only so much pipeline capacity. And before we were exporting with natural gas specifically, we were exporting about 5%. And that's gone to 15%. So that's all domestic gas that would be here, lowering the price essentially. And it's natural gas is much higher than it was. So you saw there was that Freeport LNG liquid natural gas export terminal in Texas that had a fire and exploded. That's going to be offline until like the end of October now. And natural gas prices have gone down because of that, because there's more gas that's essentially forced to be in the U.S. market. Right. So that's, we talked earlier about the kind of stranded gas in Marcellus. If you're able to build the infrastructure that's needed, which is really pipes and processing plants in an efficient manner, to really kind of like have this be a more stabilized market price, then you're not going to see necessarily these swings that you will. But I think I've heard Biden say a lot of times about how we're going to have to deal with inflation to fight Russia, essentially. And part of that is a component of that is shipping off our natural gas to Europe to dampen their energy crisis at the expense of, our pocketbooks here at home.
If you would like to learn more about the New Next podcast, find us at thenewnextpodcast.com, where you can suggest a topic you would like for us to cover. If you enjoyed what you heard, share the podcast, tell a friend about it, or rate us with 5 stars.